I am really, truly geeky about this whole family business thing. But the thing that's makes me most passionate about family businesses is that there's a humanity to a family business that a lot of people don't feel like exists in private equity owned companies or public companies. There's a center of gravity in a family business where a family most often has strong values, cares about their people, reinvests in their business, reinvests in their community. There's a lot of research that shows that family businesses reinvest more in their people.
This is the Organizational Health Advantage podcast with Keyt Hadley and James Felton, principal consultants at Table Group. They're in the business of coaching leaders to build strategic focus and cultural alignment that leads to amazing results. Welcome to the Org Health Advantage.
Hello, and welcome back to the Org Health Advantage podcast. I'm your co-host, James Felton, and I'm excited to be joined by my good friend and colleague, Keyt Hadley. Keyt, how are you doing today?
Good. Same here, James. Excited. And since we're on video, you can see we have a guest, our friend Andrew Keyt. And
yes.
We've had the good fortune of working with Andrew and a client and have gotten to know him and have been impressed by him and the work he does. And he's been able to just explain some of the mysteries of the family business universe that we often find ourselves in. So Andrew,
Yes.
Really great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah. So Andrew is, so first of all, he's a third generation family business owner. He is the chairman of the Generation 6 Enterprise Advisors. He's written a book called Myths and Mortals right here. I've got a copy.
You're the guy who bought my book.
Yes, I am. And I will admit that I bought it and I set it down and I didn't read it for a long time. And then I picked it up and read it on an airplane as I was headed down to see a client that was a Gen 5 family business. And by the time I landed, I was like, okay, I now understand some things that I did not understand before. And this is incredibly helpful. So I think I texted you after I did that. I was like, oh, like we've got to talk more. So anyways, welcome.
Family business is such a complex thing. It's this mixture of your personal life, your professional life, meaning, purpose, money. So what could get emotional about that, right?
Totally. How did you get into this line of work?
Yeah.
Oh, it's convergence of the stars. Actually, the person who introduced me to one of the top people in the field, I've just got back from his funeral today. He introduced me to one of the top people in family business 30 years ago at the same time that my father was passing away. My father was sick with lung cancer. And my dad asked me to stay late at the hospital one night, and he proceeded to tell me that he was going to pass all the ownership in our family business to me and not split it between me and my brothers. I'm the middle of three brothers. And my reaction was, we have a family business? What are you talking about? He had moved away from this small town in Ohio where he and his cousins owned a variety of assets. My grandmother's family owned the bank, and my grandfather's family owned the newspaper, and both families had farms and real estate. And so at the age of 22, I kind of became an owner in a family business because my father passed away that night. So I woke up the next day, a newly minted family business owner, having to figure out how to deal with my dad's cousins who were in their 50s and 60s at the time. I was 22. And I was already kind of like fascinated with families and how families work. And so I was talking to people about, like, is there a job working with companies around how to help create family-friendly policies for employees? And that was the route I was going down. And then my family friend introduced me to this guy working with family businesses. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I met two other people within 8 days through different people working with family businesses. So it's kind of like, hey, stupid, go this way,
Wow. So what happened between you and your brothers? I'd love to know that right from the start. Like, you're the middle brother. That's hard enough as it is, being a middle child. And now you're the one who's like running your family business.
I joke that we were young enough and dumb enough that we didn't let it impact us.
Oh,
We
good
just
for
kind of
you.
went into problem solving mode. And so basically I had all the decision making authority. And whenever, I mean, it wasn't like I was going to quit my job. It wasn't like that kind of money. But whenever I got a distribution, if I could, I shared with my brothers the distributions. And really, there wasn't enough momentum within our family to kind of preserve what we had together because the people were kind of dispersed all over the country. There was no sense of emotional ownership over the family business. It was all just people getting a check every year, which wasn't compelling enough to keep this together. So we ended up kind of unraveling it over 10 or 15 years. But the funny thing was that my dad's cousins who were in their 50s and 60s, like my dad was the one who got them organized. So what happened? They started looking to me to organize them. And I'm like, I'm 22. What the hell are you looking at me for? But for whatever reason, I was able to kind of like maneuver it over time so that we could kind of sell off assets, distribute assets. But now my brothers and I invest together. We own property together, and we're really close with each other. So.
It's funny as you tell that story, and it is you tell the story in the book, which is really insightful. But you just did what felt right and felt natural to you at the time, and it somehow worked. But my guess is that you don't always find that as you work with family businesses. That just if what one person feels is like the right thing to do, and what comes naturally to them, there might be different views of that. So, how do you?
Well, I think the realization I've come to, and I would say at 22, I didn't have this kind of perspective on this, but my dad was an estate planning attorney. He worked for Northern Trust Bank his entire career. And I just had a reflection, I don't know, with a decade or two into doing this work. It's like, I do the same thing that my dad does. I just do it in a way that's authentic to me. And I think in family businesses, we're kind of taught that we have to emulate a style of leadership from the generation that went before us. And sometimes that isn't authentic to who we are as a person. So if I tried to do the things that my dad did and lead the way that my dad did, I would make myself crazy. One of the stories I tell in the book is about Bill Wrigley. And Bill Wrigley told the story of kind of where his dad had a reputation for managing every little detail. I mean, so at that time, I think it was about a $2 billion company or something. But the ethos in Wrigley Company at that point was, if you want to change the carpet in China, you have to talk to Bill's dad. And Bill tells this story of, like having convinced his dad that they needed to start a business in India. He was running the operations in Canada, and he was in London kind of negotiating with Indian business partners. And there was this ad campaign coming out in Canada, and he was like all worked up because he's trying to manage every little detail of this ad campaign because he knows his dad's going to kind of go through every little detail. And Bill was like really honest in this interview, and he said, listen, I had to leave that meeting because I was physically making myself ill. I was so stressed out trying to lead the way my dad did, which is managing every little detail and knowing he was going to see this. And I think he was in his late 30s at the time. And I think he said, I'm not even going to make it to 50 if I keep trying to lead this way. I have to lead in a way that's authentic to me. And I think the trap we run into in family businesses is thinking we have to repeat what's gone before. But what's gone before us was for a place in time. We have to kind of meet the challenges that are in front of us, and that may not be doing things the same way we've always done it.
We when we think about the family businesses that we work with, and James and I were comparing notes, I think at any given time, James, probably a quarter to a third of the executive teams that we work with are in our family.
I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this comes up a lot, but I kind of want to explore two angles with you, Andrew. One is, when you're like the tension that exists between generations, like Gen 1 to Gen 2 or Gen 1 to Gen 3 or Gen 2 to 3, let's talk a little bit about that tension. And then I want to explore like just the tensions just within the current active folks. Doesn't matter what generation they're in, just the family dynamics. But talk about what you see and how you help people figure out this generational shift.
Sure. I mean, there are different dynamics in different generations depending on the kind of family configuration. So sometimes you can use first, second, third generation. We also talk about it as founders generation, sibling generation, and cousin generation. And you can move back and forth kind of within those categories. But, the founder stage is the person who has emotionally and kind of physically kind of created what exists. And sometimes that's a second generation member who's really built the business from, like I work with a business right now where the second generation is the one who actually built it into a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah.
But that founder has this sense of emotional intensity, being involved in everything. They have the final say on everything. They can direct, they have the moral authority to kind of direct everything. Now you move into the sibling generation and you think about siblings. Siblings have more of a sense of equality, right? It's like, we're supposed to be equal. Our parents may not always give us the message that we're equal, but, we're supposed to have a sense of equality. And so a sibling can't tell a sibling what to do like a parent can tell a child what to do, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got a shift in the second generation. So in that switch, the parents have to give some authority to the siblings to have make decisions, and the siblings have to work together to say, like, all right, who should be the leader of this business? Should it be us, right? That's
right.
We often fall in the trap in the assumption that it's a family member that should lead the business. But one of my beliefs is that, if we're thinking about the best interest of the business, that it's not about who's going to be the next leader. It's like, what do we need from the next leader? And then who fits those categories, right? And hopefully it's a family member. That's great. But not every family member can breed CEOs of billion-dollar companies, right? So can we cultivate a sense of reverence in the family about, we have to do what's right for the family and what's right for the business. And it's not always a linear question. And then to go back from siblings to cousins grew up in separate households, right? They often are influenced by their parents who sometimes come from outside the lineage. And so you get more diversity of thought, opinion. Siblings know exactly which button to push in each other because they installed the button. Cousins have a little bit more distance from each other. So the emotional intensity, I think, is greatest in that kind of founder to sibling stage. In the cousin stage, you're trying to build this sense of, why do we want to be in business together? Like, what is it beyond money that's going to keep us together? Right? There's a whole bunch of people who say you got to protect the business. The business is the golden goose because the business is what's producing all the money. I'm here to tell you the family's the golden goose. Because if the family's not working, no business is working, right? You need if you want a successful multi-generational family business, you have to cultivate strong relationships. You're fighting the entropy of families. Families naturally grow apart. How many people in your life do you know that know their second and third cousins? Most people don't. If you want a successful multi-generational family business, you have to cultivate relationships amongst the ownership group that they're committed to building this business for the benefit of all. And sometimes that means you have to prune the tree. It's not about creating a huge family tree, but it has to be a conversation within the family.
So one of my active clients right now is 3 brothers, a couple of cousins, parents still involved. So all 3 of those dynamics are at play. They have this wonderful motto that guides them, which is business first, family always.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates really interesting conversations. I'm curious, Andrew, how you go about advising family businesses. In a non-family business, the person in charge has been hired to be in charge. They've been promoted up through the ranks. They've been trained. It's really clear who the leader is because that's the role that they were selected for, either by the board or by the executive team. How do you advise your family business clients? You have to choose the cousin or the brother.
Mm-hmm.
Who is going to make that decision? How does that work? How do you qualify for that? Is it who was toughest as a kid? Like, walk me through how you even unpack that.
Well, it's a delicate conversation, right? And it's not a linear conversation because you're often dealing with, history in the family. And so sometimes it takes a while to work up to that conversation. In the idea, there's the ideal of what we would love to happen, and then there's what you can make happen in the reality of that family. So the ideal of what you want to create is a system where everybody in the family is thinking about, what does the next leader of this business need to look like? What are the strategic challenges we're going to face in the next 3, 5, 10 years? And what do we need from our leadership team to get there? And do we have a process in place so that we can understand the talents of each family member? Can we understand what they're capable of? Can we give them opportunities to grow and challenge themselves and to get better and see if they can, fulfill those responsibilities? And often that comes down to governance. One of the things that is a staple of longstanding family businesses is they commit themselves to governance. And there are kind of two elements to that. There's family governance and there's business governance. And so family governance is regularly getting the family together to cultivate that sense of connection and cohesion with each other. And a part of that is business governance, which is having a board of directors that really holds the management team accountable. One of the great things if you're a private family company is that your board can really be helping you with your strategy. If you're a board of a public company, you're dealing with multiple constituencies, reporting to the markets. You don't get to really dig into the strategy of a company. In a private family company, your board, you can bring in really talented people to help you think about your strategy. And from my perspective, the best successions happen when the board is actively saying, here's what we need from the next leader of this company. And we're going to shepherd the process so that there's an objective and fair process. And if a family member can meet the bar, then that is what we want, because the family member is going to have that sense of family values and commitment to the culture and building for the future.
Yeah. I have a question around the kind of the roles that we play, but not on an org chart. We're getting into holiday season, and I think when families get back together, they fall into some roles that they've played for decades. How do you coach teams through that, Andrew? Because it might not always be productive. In fact, it usually probably isn't. And but we fall into those. And so how do we coach people, and how do we give feedback? Because it's probably like really sensitive conversations in those moments.
James, as you're saying that, I'm laughing. I'm laughing because we're recording this now. We're coming up to Thanksgiving. I'm in my mid 50s, and my older brother is going to come to town for Thanksgiving. We get along great. We're good friends, but he will always be my older brother. He will step into my kitchen and he will give me advice about the way things could be better. And that it's just, now we're not in business together, which is great, and we're going to have a blast, but it's so funny that you say that because it's so true.
Well,
even the best of us
we play roles that we don't normally play with outside of the family,
Even the best of us regress to our childhood selves in Thanksgiving sometimes, just because those patterns are so ingrained. And, actually, a family I've worked with for over a decade, this is maybe 9 years ago, but the father and mother kept calling their 3 daughters the girls. And at one point I'm just like, these are 40-year-old women with their own family. These aren't the girl. These are, but parents see their kids as kids. And so what you're talking about, James, is that we have roles as family members. We have, if we're working in the company, we have roles as managers and leaders in the company. And some people in the family have ownership. So we have roles as owners. And the problem is emotionally, they all get kind of thrown in the same bucket. And we don't know whether we're talking about with our family hat on or whether we're talking with our ownership hat on. So we're talking about, I was in a conversation with a family about dividends, and dividends, you would think that's a pretty rational thing from an owner. You've got capital at risk, you deserve a return on your investment. And this daughter stood up and said, I deserve more dividends because my dad wasn't there when I was growing up. And I was just like, I think we need to do some education about dividends, but let's talk about this emotional energy. So often the emotional energy of the family relationships confounds our conversations about the things that seem more rational. Most family businesses don't fail because they can't solve the business problems. Most family businesses fail because they can't work through the family issues. What we know about family relationships that sustain themselves is that family members turn towards each other rather than away from each other in a conflict, that they have enough trust and connection with each other that they will think about the best interests of everybody, not just my self-interest. I always kind of say, if we're talking about me rather than we in a family business, we're in trouble, but there's a flip side to that is if the individual doesn't feel like the collective family cares enough about their needs, interests, and desires, then they're not going to lean into trusting the larger family, right? So, there was a whole era of family business consultants that said, are you a family first business or a business first family? And they were creating a false dichotomy, right?
Right.
They were trying to make a simple equation. You either sacrifice for the family or you sacrifice for the business. What are you going to do? The reality is you have to cultivate the family that knows when it needs to sacrifice for the family and when it needs to sacrifice for the business and how to balance those two. What I love about the family that you talked about, Keith, is like, okay, our orientation is business first, but family always. So if we're family always, we'll focus on business first, but we're going to think carefully if it has a dramatic impact on the family, right? We understand that the family underneath it is what's going to sustain this across time. If we have to buy out family branches every 10, 15, 20 years, that's really, how many businesses can afford to take a third of their capital, half their capital out of the business and still survive? It's a real threat.
Yeah. Before we leave the idea of roles, how do you help folks navigate those roles? James and I have been in conversations with exec teams where we talk about roles, but in a family you have the role of the family roles. You're a dad, you're a mom, you're a daughter, you're a son, you're a brother, you're a sister, you're a cousin. But then you also you could be a family member and be a manager or an executive. That's a different role. Or you could be a family member and be an individual contributor. You can be an owner and a family member and not an employee. So what are the models that you use, or how do you coach people through these roles? I want to hear you out on this.
I'll give you a couple of examples of how we do this. And you raise a great question because, even if I'm just talking about myself, as an owner, I may want more money because I'd love to buy a new house or, whatever. But as a manager, I may see the need for reinvestment in this company if we really want to grow.
Right.
And I'm hopefully emotionally mature enough to kind of know the tension between these things. And I've got enough education to know the difference in the finite relationship between dividends, reinvestment, and growth. Right. But that's not always the case. So when I work with families, there are kind of two things that I'll do. Sometimes we'll just take the issue and as a group, we'll just say, okay, here's the family hat, the ownership hat, the management hat. Families tend to see things more of like, we're supposed to be equal as family members. We want fairness. We're trying to balance those things. If you're talking the management bucket, you're thinking more meritocracy. What have I earned? What am I getting compensated for my performance? As an owner, you're thinking about, I've got capital at risk. What's the return on my investment? And trying to just in a family discussion, think through the issue at hand and say, what's the ownership perspective on this? And do we have the same ownership perspective? Because you may have 3 different ownership perspectives within one family. As managers, you may have people at different levels of the company that think different things about where we're supposed to go and what we're trying to do. And then on the family side, we may have, maybe family members who aren't working for the business aren't as willing to reinvest in the company because they don't think the return that they're getting on the money is as good. So can we parse these things out and talk about it? Another way I do this is sometimes I will take family members and assign them a role. And we'll talk through it and we'll say, you're the voice of the owner. you don't have to agree with everything you say, but if what you say has to be a valid ownership view of things, right?
Yeah.
And so you get them to kind of play out the different roles. And then what you're trying to do is kind of create a little sense of emotional separateness from the role. Because sometimes we get fused in a role or fused in an idea, and we can't separate ourselves from that idea. So if I can say, okay, if I have my family hat on, I have a certain viewpoint. If I have my ownership hat on, I may have a slightly different nuance on this issue in terms of how I think about it. And I want to say one thing about ownership, because I think family businesses often tend to be a little bit unsophisticated in thinking about things from an ownership perspective. They tend to see their ownership more as sunk cost than capital at risk. So it's just something that's there, right? They're not thinking necessarily with the idea of, I have X amount of capital invested in a business. What is the return I'm getting on that capital? They're emotionally fused with their ownership. They're just all in and and that's why you end up getting some confusion, because sometimes we overcompensate family members for what they're doing because we're not taking money out as owners. So we're just confusing the equation, right? So but the reality is, whether you bought the business from your parents, whether you inherited these shares or you earned the shares through your position, you've got capital at risk, right? So can we develop a sense of professionalism on the ownership side to see this capital at risk and say, okay, we're getting 3% return on our capital. Is that enough? And if we're getting enough emotionally from the business, maybe that is enough, Right. It's up to the decision, but often we're not having a clear conversation about that, I had this family I worked with that had a business unit that was losing $3 million a year, and had been for about 4 or 5 years. And we finally came down to this conversation. I'm like, so why do you keep this business unit alive? And they're like, this is the business unit that my dad started the company with. And if we let that go, we're letting go of it.
It was an emotional side.
So I shifted the conversation to, so would your dad want you to lose $3 million a year? And they're kind of like, no. Okay, then shift the conversation. Are there other ways you can honor your dad's legacy other than losing $3 million a year? So in that next year, they decided to create this kind of museum that both talked about their father as well as his contributions to the industry and all these things. And they think they spent $1.5 million on that museum and pocketed the other $1.5 million that they would have lost. And they stopped losing money moving forward. It's like, but they had to kind of professionalize their understanding of ownership and develop emotional differentiation. So like the process of becoming a fully functional adult is differentiating from your parents. That means learning to stand separate and apart from your parents, but stay connected. So teenagers rebel against their parents often because they're trying to establish their sense of identity. That's their developmental job, right? They're trying to figure out who they are separate from their parents. But just rejecting your parents is not differentiating because you're not staying connected to them. Adults learn how to have differences and stay connected with each other. Mature adults can have differences and work through them with each other and stay connected. But too often, too often, we get this example of like, if it's not working, just cut off. Like, that's not healthy differentiation. Strong relationships can withstand a lot. You have to invest in building the trust and connection, but you can accomplish so much more if you can work through conflict together and stay connected.
The richness of that comment of being able to stay connected and have differences is as part of like a maturation process that a family goes through to become adult as an adult, and working in a business. That's fascinating, because we in our work, we often open up some of our sessions as a way to build trust. We'll talk about personal histories, and people will talk about their families growing up and some of the dynamics. And now this is not in a family business we're asking this, although we do that when there's family members present as well. But often something that you'll hear come out in those family histories is, if you had to get differentiation by completely separating, you're still almost defined by that relationship, as opposed to a normal or a healthy process of differentiation where you're still connected, and yet you've matured to the place where you can have differences of opinion and still stay connected.
Yeah.
I would think that that's a really key component of having active parent-child relationships in a business.
Yeah. I mean, the only caveat I would say, in systems of abuse, you may need that separation to create health. But the reality is we all bring our families to work. We all bring our families to work, whether you're in a family business or a non-family business. Often your dynamics with your boss are going to mirror relationships with power figures in your life. So if you had a problematic relationship with your father and your father was really domineering, you encounter a domineering person in the workforce, you're going to have some transference with that person, much like your father. Or if, for me, like, my dad showed love by economic production and working his butt off. I always knew he loved me, but he wasn't always able to kind of express it in the way that I, as a kid, wanted it. Right. Like, and no, congratulations. No parents can be able to completely guess how their kids want to receive everything. So this is not a cut on my dad. But like, I always had this kind of longing for this nurturing father. And so in my work life, I always found myself trying to get that sense of nurturance from a father figure and picking the wrong people all the time. And so it really comes down to kind of developing a sense of emotional awareness. And cultivating a sense of who am I, what am I good at, and not trying to be somebody I'm not trying to be my father. I can still honor my father and who my father was. I say that I do the exact same thing my father does. I just do it in a way that's authentic to who I am. I mean, you just gotta, I think, if I were to kind of think about a leadership skill that is most important, it's kind of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, kind of knowing what drives you emotionally, what triggers you emotionally. Because often, if we don't understand our triggers, we get driven by somebody else other than what we want and what we need, or what the system needs. Oftentimes, I find next generation members get stuck in the kind of ego part of leadership. I need to do X by X date. I need to be the president of a X size unit. They want all these kind of more ego-driven external indicators of their success. And one of the things I talk about that successors have to struggle with, which is internal credibility and external credibility, is internal credibility is, am I credible to myself? Do I believe in myself, my capabilities? And then external credibility, have I earned credibility with others? And in a family business, I talk about the successor's curse, which is your successes are never your own and your failures always are. So if you're a success, it's because you're part of the Silver Spoon Club and you always had everything handed to you. If you're a failure, it's because you're part of the Silver Spoon Club and you always had everything handed to you. So as a successor, you have to learn how to be credible to yourself. Like, how do I convince myself? How do I learn for myself that I am good at what I do? And then how do I earn that credibility with others? Because there are going to be people who are going to be saying, you don't deserve to be there. You're just, like the Nepo baby movement that's been out there the last decade or so. It's like everybody's like against, the next, anything that reeks of being handed something. But we all have relationships, and that's part of our humanity. But how do we make ourselves credible to ourselves, and how do we earn our credibility with others?
Yeah. And Andrew, all of that is true with any leader, any executive, any CEO, owner. It just seems it's maybe more prevalent in family businesses.
Right.
because you're dealing with people who know you at a different level, and they can trigger you, as you said, because they installed the trigger, and
Mhm.
and it's like the self-awareness is hard even when you're when you're an executive, but it's even harder when you've got people around you that like kind of know your flaws and have seen you grow up and can touch on those at any moment. And yeah, those have to be some tough conversations that you lead people through.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering how you do that, and like what are the conversations you have that help people overcome their insecurities with their families?
The first thing I have to kind of assess is kind of like what can happen in the context of a family discussion? What is a conversation that needs to happen one-on-one and
Mm.
kind of
Mm,
outside the family spotlight?
yeah,
Sometimes with insecurity, you don't want that to play out in a family conversation. You want to have that kind of, you may want to have some preliminary conversations with the individual in a place where they don't feel like the spotlight's on them, let them struggle
yeah,
with it and let them work through it.
yeah.
But sometimes, you can deal with it in a family context and talk about vulnerability uh, in the context of the family and bring vulnerability out across the family because everybody in the family has vulnerabilities. They're just
Hmm.
usually not talking about them. And the more trust and strength we have in the family, the more we can bring our vulnerabilities and struggles forth and be there for each other in those vulnerabilities and struggles. So a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of listening, and then I'm teaching the family how to listen to each other as well. Because as you probably know this, Keith, you were talking about Thanksgiving dinner coming up, you know, when we're around Thanksgiving dinner as a family and somebody's telling a story, we're halfway into our response of what they're saying before they finish talking, right? So we're
Yeah.
Oh
we're
yeah.
reacting to what they're saying rather than truly listening to what they're saying.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll try to slow the conversation down with a family and say, "So what did you hear your brother say there?" And then they try to repeat it back, and sometimes it's wildly off and like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
check that out. Is that ask your brother what is that what he really
Yeah.
said? And
Yeah.
then, I joke that I'm a little bit of an emotional translator is like,
Yeah.
I, sometimes it takes me jumping in and say, that's not what I heard your brother say. So what's behind the
Yeah.
emotion here? And then it's kind
Yeah.
of peeling back the layers of the emotion because over time, we've built up layers of emotions and reactions of hurts said and unsaid that drive our conversations. And there's an old adage that my colleague Joe uses, which is a family's almost never fighting about what they say they're fighting about. Right? You have to peel back the layers of the onion to feel like to figure out what the emotions are behind the issue. It's not about the dividends. It's about the fact Dad wasn't there when I was growing up. Like, all right,
Right.
that's an
Yeah.
issue we can deal with, right? We can
Yeah.
say, oh, like, so what did it feel like when Dad wasn't there? Can Dad own up to that in any way?
Yeah.
No parent's going to be able to completely fulfill their kids' needs, but can they acknowledge it? Can they understand the impact of that? And
Yeah.
can the next generation understand that their parent probably didn't want to hurt them in that way? Their parent, was trying to do what they thought was best, right?
Yeah.
Can we assume benign intent? Can we assume that everybody is doing things because they love each other? That's
Yeah.
not always possible, but wherever we can assume benign intent, we can have so much more grace in our conversation with each other.
Yeah.
So much of what you're doing, which I appreciate, is you're giving voice or you're naming dynamics that exist that you see, multiple families dealing with. These patterns have names, and we see it everywhere. Similar to the kinds of things we talk about with the 5 dysfunctions of a team or some of the stuff around working genius, but just being able to pull apart an otherwise tangled web of conversation and emotion and hurt feelings and dynamics and say, hey, there's some patterns here. There's some names. Some of this is predictable. You're not crazy for experiencing this. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
got to be such a gift that you give to people. Um,
Yeah.
and we often think of some of the some of the difficult or some of the complication of a family business. But I want to get your take on some of the wonderful sides of a family business. Like what is it that family businesses bring that you just can't get anywhere else?
Well, this may my brothers call me the king of useless family business trivia because I'm so passionate about family businesses. But and we'll be driving around the highway and I'll be like, well, that's a family business. I'm guessing it's about 100 million sales and about like I am really truly geeky about this whole family business thing. But the thing that's makes me most passionate about family businesses is that there's a humanity to a family business that a lot of people don't feel like exists in private equity owned companies or public companies. There's a center of gravity in a family business where a family most often has strong values, cares about their people, reinvests in their business, reinvests in their community. There's a lot of research that shows that family businesses reinvest more in their people. They reinvest more in research and development. They do things that aren't just about making more money. And to me, that's what real market capitalism should be about. It should be about putting capital to use not just for economic gain, but for the gain in human capital, the gain in social capital, the gain in intellectual capital, and spiritual capital.
Right.
When we invest in people and our communities, we create more for everybody. Family businesses seem to kind of do this inherently in some ways, right? Because they're doing this to take care of their families, and then you'll hear about people in family businesses saying, who are non-family members, saying like, I feel like a part of the family, right? And that's that sense of kind of commitment to our people, to something greater than ourselves. And to me, that is the most powerful form of economic enterprise, when we're creating both financial rewards and human rewards.
That absolutely bears out when I think about the family businesses that I'm currently working with or have worked with in the past. That deep commitment to people, and they'll use that word. It's like, hey, when we say family, we're family, meaning the employees who work here, and that commitment that we're doing this for more than just enrichment or driving stakeholder value or return. That there's a reputation, there's a standing, there's gravitas in our community, that it means something to be a family business. It provides stability in a community.
I want to talk about one thing that is a kind of quirk in that. Okay, so one of the mistakes family businesses make sometimes is that they use employment in the family business to take care of the family member. So they overcompensate the family member for the job that they're performing. And they actually do that with non-family employees that have been with them for a long time too. It's like, this person has been with us for 20 or 30 years. They were with Dad when he started the company, so we have to keep giving them raises and promotions. And we absolutely want to acknowledge everybody's contribution to the business, but we're confounding the professionalism of the business if we're not tying it to accountability. And accountability is just as much for the employee as it is for the employer. Because when you overpay somebody for what they're doing, if you don't hold them accountable, they know they're not accountable. They know they're not doing the job. That's going to hurt their self-esteem. People are at their best when they're good at what they're doing, they're passionate about it, and they're being held accountable, and they're achieving, right? So if we're enabling people by overpaying them, whether a family member or not, we're not doing them any favors, right? We're giving them a little bit more money.
They know it, and the people around them know it.
Absolutely. And then that, I think I said this to you before, Keith, like the standard. The behavior unaddressed becomes the standard. So if we're going to put up with this behavior, whether it's a family member or not, that becomes the standard within the organization. And so over time, that can easily become a cancer in the organization. But if we have accountability and people are performing, and they're going to be happier in their jobs if they're accountable and performing, right? And if they're not performing, we have an opportunity to help them find somewhere where that they can perform, and that we can find things that they're interested in and passionate about. Sometimes for a family member, that means we're going to give you some time to figure that out. We're going to keep you on salary for a month or two while you go through some career counseling. We're going to try to help you find a place where you can be accountable and passionate. But just pretending and paying somebody something to take care of them really just becomes enablement and creates dependency. And that's not in the overall well-being of the family in the long run.
Yeah.
No. And it's not in the well-being of obviously the company, but the rest of the culture, and it'll really, A+ performers will get, disappointed or depressed by like having to put up with mediocrity all around them.
Yep.
And so
we often see that the first people to get frustrated and leave are your best people when they see that kind of mediocrity. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as we kind of wind up our time here, I'm just curious, three groups of people. How would you advise somebody that's in a family business, that's a family member in sort of that founder or the Gen 1? What would be your advice for them?
So I would start with your kids need your guidance and your mentorship. They don't need you to solve all their problems. They have to learn to solve problems on their own, right? So if I'm always jumping in to save the day for them, it may make me feel really good as a parent that I'm helping my kid, but it's not helping them build the grit that they need to have when they're going to face challenges. I always kind of, when talking to parents who say, I don't want my kids to struggle with what I struggle with. And I talk about like, well, how did you get to be who you are? Are you happy with who you are? And well, it's your struggles that are part of what got you to where you are. So, the problem is the more successful, the wealthier you are, more you have to set more artificial barriers for your kids. Like you just don't have the friction that you have when you have to feed the family, right? When you're wealthy, you just don't have the hurdles and struggles that you have to have when you're younger. So we have to be intentional about creating the space for struggle and for failure. And like one of the things that happens, and I talk about in the book, is that, like we create this mythology around the parents, or maybe it's the grandparents or great grandparents, but we create these stories of this wild success, but we don't tell the stories of the failure, right? Like what were the struggles that helped them get to where they are?
Right.
And so then the next generation thinks like, I have to do this without failing. And it becomes this insurmountable task. And so, it's not about repeating what your parents or grandparents did. That may be impossible. It's about being true to what you think is in the best interest of the organization, to your skill sets, your talents, your abilities, and then learning as quickly as you can. You're going to fail, right? Like if you're an entrepreneur of any sort, you're going to fail at some point. How quickly do you learn from it? And how quickly do you adapt? So parents need to understand that they can't solve all their kids' problems, and they need to listen more to their kids.
Yeah. They probably need to create some space, even a different business unit or a different entity that allows them the ability to struggle and fail. Now, if you're on the Gen 2 or the Gen 3, the generation coming up through the ranks, what would be your advice to that generation?
I would go back to that question of credibility. Is earn your credibility. Make sure that you believe in yourself. And sometimes that means getting external feedback about what's going on. Sometimes that's taking on challenging assignments. Sometimes it means failure. You're only going to get stronger if you're, stretching yourself. Earn your credibility with others. Earn trust with your parents. Listen to your parents. Don't just discard everything your parents say as bull. Understand that your parents have a real passion and care for this business, and that them creating space for you as a leader requires that they trust you, and they trust you care about the business, not just your own well-being, right?
Right.
If parents are going to feel confident enough in the next generation to let go, they have to believe that their kids are going to take care of the people, they're going to take care of the culture, that they're going to care as much about this business as they do.
Yeah.
And that for some parents, they may need to be connected to that business for the rest of their lives, right? You know, I in the book, I tell the story of Mike Hammer, who's a good friend of mine. And he had this intractable problem with his father, where they were just butting heads. You know, he had come into the family business invited by his father, and his father said, "Yeah, if you turn around this business unit, you know, we'll make you CEO at some point." And then it just never happened. It never happened. He turned around the business unit, and you know, Mike kept pushing to try to get his dad out. You know, it's like, "You need to get out of my way. You need to get out of my way." And at some point, Mike I think he went on a leadership retreat, but he got to this point where he reflected and he realized, my dad's got to stay connected to this business for his entire life. It's just a part of who he is. Yeah. So instead of having a conversation about how do I push my dad out, can I have a conversation about how do I keep my dad connected in a way that means something for him? And it creates the space for me. Our parents often still need that sense of meaning and purpose and being connected to what they've built.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And real quick, for the non-family members, especially non-family member executives that are working with family members, what's your advice to them?
So enjoy the family feeling of being in the family business, but understand that as much as you may feel like family, you're not. It's not for anything, just keeping a sense of reality. So you still have to earn your place there, and be careful about it's about more than money for the family in most cases, right? So just understand that there's an emotional landscape that you may not know the whole story about. Don't take it too personally, and do your job well and pick the family well. If you have a family with good values and a family that really cares about their people, it can be an incredibly rewarding place to make a life and a career.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. All right. Well, Andrew, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. And do you have like a LinkedIn page or a blog page or something where people can find out more information from you and about you?
Sure. I have all of those things. I'm on LinkedIn, and our firm's website is generation6.com, generation the number 6.com. And I'm one of the things that is one of my core leadership beliefs is generosity, is a key part of how I've gotten to where I am. You know, I actually got into a Twitter fight with somebody who called himself a self-made billionaire. I'm like, nobody's a self-made billionaire. And this is the end of my Twitter career because, I got attacked 3 ways to Sunday, for saying somebody's not a self-made billionaire, but generosity is one of my core beliefs. So I'm more than happy to talk to anybody to help them think through their issues. And that's how the person I mourned today, it was somebody who was incredibly generous and taught me about generosity in the world. And we need more of that in the world these days.
For sure. And you've definitely been generous with us and with our listeners and viewers. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
And really appreciate it. And Keyt, great having you on the show. You were awesome with all your questions. And to the listener watcher. Oh, yeah.
I'll just say Keyt's great to work with. Your team is great to work with. I love collaboration. Doing this work is hard stuff. And so when you can truly collaborate with somebody who's generous in knowledge, spirit, and so I don't want to kind of end this without kind of acknowledging what you guys bring to the table.
Thank you.
the table
Thank you.
group.
And it has been a joy collaborating with you. It's awesome.
Yes.
All right.
And I can attest to that too. Keith is really easy to work with, and I love his back office team. So, all right. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, Keith. Great seeing you. And until next time, please share and subscribe to the Org Health Advantage podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Org Health Advantage. Your hosts, Keith and James, are helping leaders change the world of work and invite you to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. For more resources on building stronger teams and organizational health, check out tablegroup.com.